So let's regroup for a second, right? We talked about Knicks guards. Knicks guards have an off the dribble game. They're strong catch and shoot players. They're spotting up. They're really good in the half court. They're efficient. They finish well. They have a high offensive EPM and a bad to meh defensive EPM. Point being, look, if your offense is really good, that's great. We can deal with the bad defense because we can cover you up with other players. And when you look at the Knicks wings, okay, Knicks wings, they don't typically have an off the dribble game. That's fine. Like Reggie Bullock wasn't going to be pulling up. Cam Reddish, you don't really want him to do that. Josh Hart can sort of do it, but not really. And even Quentin Grimes sort of shades into this area. I mean, again, he's probably more of a guard, but he fluctuates into, well, he's not a pull-up shooter. There's the catch and shoot element still with spotting up. Really good in the half court. Really efficient. Great finisher. You're a high floor offensive player, right? Like middle to high offensive EPM. And you've got a really high defensive EPM. So, those are the two buckets that the Knicks have. You need to fall into one of them in order to keep staying a Knick. And when you go through the motions with RJ, it's okay, well, he doesn't have the off the dribble game. He's not a spot up shooter. He's not finishing well in the half court. So he's not really playing well in the half court. He's not been efficient. He doesn't finish well. He did have a moderately high offensive EPM, but it wasn't 90s, 80s. It was in the 60s. That's not that high. And he had a bad to meh defensive EPM, 29th percentile last season. But it like that doesn't cut it. So you think, okay, well, he's then more of the wing. You don't need the offensive game. You don't need the off the dribble game, but you still need the spot up shooting. You still need the half court and the efficiency and the finishing. And he's got the middle to high offensive EPM, but he doesn't have the high defensive EPM. And what's frustrating as a fan, at least speaking for me, he has the size and the strength, I feel, to be that really high defensive EPM player. And he just has not been that. It has not been the case. So that's where I struggle with this, where RJ kind of doesn't check off nearly enough of the boxes that the Knicks have very clearly outlined through 3 years of operating as a franchise under this regime. And then it comes down to this one thing, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah.
If RJ can't be an excellent pull-up shooter, he has to be an excellent defender for the Knicks, right? We're talking just in the scope of as a Knick. And if he can't be an excellent defender, he has to be an excellent pull-up shooter for the Knicks. And if he can't be an excellent pull-up shooter or an excellent defender, his career, specifically as a Knick, long-term is in jeopardy because he doesn't fall into those buckets. And that's where I get concerned for him staying on this team.
Go back and watch post games if you don't believe me. The parts that had me most frustrated throughout the year, it was the defense. And it was the games where I just felt like he was making them worse on the defensive end of the floor, which should not be a thing that ever happened. Now, that certainly came around after the All-Star break, and I think it came around in the playoffs when I thought he defended certainly better. Your mileage may vary on how good he defended. Your point about what he needs to do to stay a member of the Knicks, this is not a new thing. This conversation happened 2 years ago. And do you know how I know what happened 2 years ago? Because his trainer, Drew Hanlon, is very forthright and forthcoming about what they work on during the summer. And 2 summers ago, on the list of things was pull-up shooting. That was a thing that they were going to work on. And he went out there 2 years ago and he took more pull-up threes than he ever had before in his career. I forget what the eventual number was, but it was by far the most. It was a lot. First time he had really tried to make a dent in that area, and it never really came. And this year started out a little bit of that, and then, like you said earlier, they just pulled the plug. They're like, we're not trying this anymore because it ain't working. No. So what does that tell you about that everybody was on the same page about. That you're I mean, if you're a guard or a wing in the NBA and you can't pull up at all, forget about how many guys in the league are guards and wings that can't pull up and they make $25 million a year. Just how many starters are guards and wings that are not threats at all to pull up from deep. And then when you go through that list of players, ask yourselves, well, okay, do they perhaps bring something else very special to the table that is a reason that they are on the floor and that stands out in some other way? And it's tougher to have that conversation about RJ because the special thing that he brings to the table is his ability to get to the rim at will. And then that gets into the next part of the conversation, which is the decision making on the drives and the efficiency on the finishing on the drives and all of that other stuff. And then eventually you kind of talk yourself, you muddle it up to the point where you talk yourself into continuing it. At some point, you got to shit or get off the pot. Like there are certain prerequisites to being a big time player in the NBA, and the way the Knicks are building their team, I just think you nailed it. It doesn't have to be him, but it's tougher if it's not him.
Yeah. And again, I mean, let's look at some of the other factors, right? Obviously, Donovan Mitchell, star. Knicks wanted to, at a certain point, move RJ for a star. You get it. But why was it Donovan Mitchell? It's not just because he was a star who happened to be available. Yeah. It's that RJ Barrett, Donovan Mitchell was in his mid-20s, incredible pull-up shooter, right? Like we called it the Donovan Mitchell box for a reason.
Yeah.
Like that is what he does. And I kept saying it. I will keep saying it. The clearest indication that the Knicks are looking to move on in some capacity. Yeah, we can talk about they didn't get Donovan Mitchell and it was a PR move for the reason why they extended RJ Barrett. But also we know this front office is very big about you're either extended by this team or you're on your way out. They try not to mess with the gap in between when you can be traded and not. And RJ Barrett being extended, he's now eligible to be moved, whereas it would be a tougher situation. You have to deal with restricted free agency. And the one key factor I keep going back to, he was given an ascending contract, and that is the least Brock Aller thing possible. He doesn't do that for guys on their second deals. Even Jalen Brunson got a descending deal. It doesn't add up. And that was a warning sign for me. It still is. But let's press on a little bit here, right? Because like defensive EPM last year, 29th percentile. Year before that, 43rd percentile. His best defensive season. Second year, 58th percentile. His best defensive season couldn't even crack.
He was good on defense that year.
Right, he was. But he couldn't even get to the point where we're talking about a Quentin Grimes, an Emmanuel Quickley. Yeah. Like it hasn't leveled up there. And his rookie year, which is understandable, 11th percentile. That year was a complete mess. He was a rookie. I don't fault him at all for that year. It was a COVID year. It just, I don't fault him whatsoever. Defensive turnover percentage, right? His steal percentages and his block percentages have dropped every single year. 56 to 21st to 11th to 4th percentile for steal percentages. 31st to 23rd to 14th to 10th for block percentages. Like every year it's been dropping to the point where now his steal percentage is in the single digits and his block percentage is 1 percentage point away from being there too. What's next? The efficiency and the finishing. Okay. We've talked before about how struggle with effective field goal percentage, with true shooting percentage. He's never been above the 27th percentile. And that was his best year, the second year. Other than that, the best season would be 21st, and that was this past season. At the rim, hasn't finished above 25th percentile, and that was this year. You keep going, right? Actually, I want to go back for 1 second. I know the defense of RJ is, okay, well, like he's not hitting threes, so take fewer threes. So now we're saying to RJ, hey, go against the Knicks plan of players 1 through 4 shooting threes, whether it's pulling up or spotting up. Do the opposite of that. That doesn't fly. That goes against everything the Knicks are building. The Knicks want strong to elite 3-point shooting from 1 to 4, so their non-spacing option at the 5 can actually coexist with that roster. It's the Jazz all over again. You go to the shot selection, right? Last 2021-22 season, a lot of not good shooting, right? Pretty red across the board. He had some good spots, right? Above the break on the weak side of the court. He was above league average. He was 38.6%. League average is 34.1%. Top of the key, right before three in the mid range, 10 of 19, 52.6%. League average is 41.8%. And then this past season, there's not a single green spot in this court. It's all red except for 4 areas that are just neutral. And in every single one of those neutral areas, he's still below league average. Okay, so he had a bad shooting season. That's fine. Compare it with the playoffs. The playoffs, there's more green. That's great. The issue is the sample size is just so small. I mean, like we're talking about in one spot outside, on the strong side of the court, outside of the paint, went 12 of 32 this past season, 37.5%. League average is 43.5%. He's in the green in the playoffs, 50%. League average in the playoffs was 44.1% when I took the screenshot. He went 2 of 4. That's 50%. It's difficult to say, oh, well, he was green when, that's the case. Same thing with the red. He was 0 for 1 in the box next to that. I'm not going to hold it against him for being 0 for 1 and suddenly it's red. Like it's a smaller amount of shots. That's the issue. And actually, if you go back real quick, the strong side above the break, he was 47 of 141 the 2021-22 season, 33.3%. Last season, 46 of 138, 33.3%. So he's very consistent in that one spot. Took 1 fewer three and had 3 fewer makes. Or actually, 1 fewer make and 3 fewer attempts. So it's just, the shooting chart is just, it's not fun to look at for him. And if you're thinking, why is it that the rules for RJ are different than Julius? It's simply because they are. They don't necessarily have to be, but Julius at least is doing more than what we are discussing in terms of RJ. It doesn't mean RJ can't get there like we've talked about. It's just, if you're wondering why the rules aren't fair, it's because they're just not. I'm not running the team. I can't explain it to you. They're on different standards.
But Julius hit. I mean, it's not fun or pretty or complex to say it this way. The number of tough shots that Julius Randle hit this year, I mean, exponentially outnumbers the number of tough shots that RJ Barrett this year is. When we talk about hit this year, and when we talk about someone being a driver of offense, that's what it is. Because if they could do that, then they bring the attention of the defense and they get other guys open looks. It's why Julius, I mean, what he was able to do in terms of helping their offense this year, and you look at the offensive on off with him, the numbers back this up. Like, he was even more than Brunson, the biggest the biggest differentiator in terms of their offensive production. And that is because defenses just had to respect him. And if they didn't respect him, he killed them. That was how good he was this year. Is there a chance that RJ could grow into something approximating that sort of player? I mean, maybe. He was not that this year. I did think his numbers around the rim in the playoffs, like you signed for that, especially that teams know it's coming. And so for him to go for, 42 and 79 at the rim, like that's a good number, especially considering his decision making on those drives was also very good. Again, this is not about bashing RJ Barrett. It's about talking about in the context of the team and what they need from that spot. It's just tough. Yeah. Well, there's more. And I do want to give some credence here in terms of the drives, right? RJ's best feature is that he gets to the rim. So we're looking at drives per game, finishing off of those drives, passing out of those drives, and points percentage. Essentially, what we're talking about here is, just to summarize, RJ has done a phenomenal job of creating points when he drives. I'm not talking about scoring. I'm saying good things typically do happen when he goes to the basket because he's got other players to either clean up his misses or he might be able to pass out of drives. Now, prior to the playoffs, he was typically struggling to pass out of these drives.
But like, for example, this regular season, this past year, pass out of drives 28.1% of the time. That ranks very low. But the Knicks as a whole don't have the best players who pass out of drives. So, okay. Then in the playoffs, 35.7%. So he took a leap of 7.6% in terms of passing out. And that opens so much up, which is what RJ did really well with. And as you can see, again, like 67.7% this past season for points percentage. That's great. The finishing is not as great, right? Like, yeah, it was nice to see him finish at 47.4%. That's marked improvement from 41.7% the year before. 47.4% finishing is on drives is also not high. It's a lower number. So he has an elite skill of getting to the rim. It's okay. Well, what happens there afterwards? And do we have the facilities to, if he's missing the shot, to still create offense after that? Which is why you wonder, okay, well, what happens if there's someone else in that place who can still drive, who can finish at a better amount than RJ has, who's passing out at around the same or better, and whose points percentage are certainly up there. But we still have to keep looking. And then we look at the 4 factors of this past season, right? 4 factors are points per possession, effective field goal percentage, turnover possession, offensive rebounding percentage. And I mean, this is a 5th one, but free throw rate. They just call it 4 factors. This is cleaning the glass. I sorted by the best difference between the offense points per possession and the defense points per possession. This past season, the regular season, the Knicks ranked 7th overall. That's great. Their areas of development, well, they were inefficient. They were 20th in effective field goal percentage, and they were 25th in defensive turnover percentage. And then they get Josh Hart. And after the Josh Hart trade, the Knicks were number one in games that Josh Hart started. So that he played in. So after the Sixers game that they lost and Josh Hart continued to play until the end of the regular season, that 20th in effective field goal percentage, it was 3rd in the NBA. The defense is then kind of what took a tilt. 19th overall in terms of effective field goal percentage, and 21st in terms of turnover percentage on the defensive end. And then you go to the playoffs. And what happened? The offense sputtered. The defense actually came together. The defense was 2nd overall in points per possession. The offense was 12th out of all the playoff teams. And you got the effective field goal percentage going back down to 16th overall out of 20 teams that made the play-in or the playoffs. And the turnover percentage went to the 18th, but they were ranked 18th. And the common theme here is efficiency. Effective field goal percentage, true shooting percentage, those can help explain the efficiency factor. And you want to talk about spacing as well. And right now I've got 10 names listed on this slide. It's Jalen Brunson, it's Quentin Grimes, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson. It's the starting 5. And then behind that, I have Deuce McBride, Emmanuel Quickley, Josh Hart, Obi Toppin, Isaiah Hartenstein. Right? Without doing anything, if you told me this was the rotation starting next year, I'd say, yep. Without touching anything and just moving Deuce in to getting a little bit more time because he played 62 games last year. And I would imagine the goal is or 64. And I would imagine the goal is to get him to play across the board. These are your 10. So where do you proceed? Well, we talked about the scheme and the Jazz and all of that with how the Knicks operate with their 5s. So unless they're getting a game-changing 4 who switches things up at the 5, does it seem fair to you, John, that Robinson and Hartenstein staying exactly where they are?
Well, probably. You never know.
Play along.
But probably.
Let's yes and this. But I do. I mean, I do want to hear your opinion. But okay.
No. For now, let's say the likeliest scenario is that both Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein will be back next year. Okay, so cross those 2 players off because let's say they're staying. All right, next. Fair to say that Jalen Brunson is staying? Yes.
Okay, I would agree with that. I also think it's probably fair to say that Josh Hart is staying with the Knicks.
Josh Hart is not going anywhere.
Great. So now of the 10-man rotation, we're down to 4 players who are unlikely to be going somewhere, and that's that. Okay, so where do we turn to next? I feel that the next place to look is Quentin Grimes. Incredibly efficient player. Don't see him go anywhere. Available for cheap. Going to get better.
Unless they have to move him, right? But like in a trade. But yeah. Emmanuel Quickley, same thing. I think
there is a time and a place where we can have that conversation. I said that midseason. It's still not yet. We're still not at the point where I feel like you're moving Emmanuel quickly. Why? Because he shores up your bench in such a fantastic way. He was a great team defender. Obviously, they missed who Emmanuel quickly was. RJ picked up the slack for someone like him. I thought that was a tremendous job by RJ. Looking at a larger sample size, though, it's very clear the impact Emmanuel quickly has on this team. And a reason why as well, I think he's staying put in the talks of him being traded, unless it's for like a star, are gone.
Yeah,
because he became more efficient. He did better on drives. He still pulls up. He does pick and roll. Like, he's doing the things that you ask a point guard on the Knicks to do. So he's there. And then the last thing I'll say, I don't see Deuce McBride leaving or being moved. I don't mean that as in he's immovable. I just see it as, again, I think he gets extended for a small amount. And if he's being extended, the unlikelihood of it's unlikely he goes somewhere else. So if we enter next season, I think those three players are still here. They're still in Knicks uniforms. Yes.
I think there's a slightly higher possibility that quickly gets moved this summer. We'll talk about it when the time comes. But neither him nor anybody else that we've talked about really changes anything, because it really just comes down to, and I know Toppin isn't crossed off either yet because we both think he's going to move. But like, it's a conversation about two guys, because it's about where do the shots come from. And if you're going to meaningfully change how you go about your business as a team on offense and how you function, like it's Brunson, Barrett, and Randle. Like, that's where the shots are coming from, and Brunson ain't going anywhere. So then it comes down to the other two, which is what we said before.
Right. So I agree. Well, just a quick backtrack. I know you thought you said it was a bold prediction that RJ and IQ, one of them gets moved.
You don't think it's that bold?
I don't. I really don't think it's that bold. But I'm digressing. I think Obi, like you, entering a contract year, stuck behind Julius Randle. I think there's the other issue of the Knicks would like someone at the 4 who can also play the 5.
I'd love to see that.
They just have not. They just don't like doing it with Julius and Obi.
No.
And Julius is Julius, and Obi is Obi, and that's just the way they see it. So I see Obi Toppin, and I circled him red as the player to be moved. And so now it's between RJ Barrett and Julius Randle. And we just talked about Julius Randle and all the things that are problematic and why they should be looking to move him, and how there's still certainly good there, but maybe he's not here for the long term. And I certainly agree to that. And we've talked about RJ and the shooting and all of that. And I can't help but feel like it's then RJ. That Julius stays, RJ goes, Obi's on the way out as well. And that's that. But it's not just that. Because just like with Julius, you can't just say goodbye to these two players. You need to find a way to get something better. Because that's what the Knicks do. They don't just dump. They make sure they are upgrading in some capacity. Yep. So let's talk about it. Okay, let's say RJ Barrett's now on the trade block. Knicks want to trade RJ, and no established star under 30 years old is available to fill his place. What should the Knicks do? Option A, keep RJ Barrett. Again, if there's a bad deal or no deal, the Knicks should take no deal and keep RJ Barrett. I'm not saying push him out the door, goodbye. It's more just, okay, let's see if we can find someone that does more of what we want them to do. B, trade for an older star. I'm not in favor of that.
No.
Quite frankly, I don't think the Knicks should be looking at anyone over the age of 30. And that's why I've been using 30 and 29 in 2022 and 28 in 2021. There is a timeline right now. And that timeline is consistently coalesced around 22, 23, 24, 25, 26-year-olds. Right? So if that's your core, keep adding players that are around that age. Because if you add someone who's on the older side, right? Like Paul George, there's a lot of talk of Paul George. Paul George has missed 39% of possible regular season games over the last 4 years. And he's turning 33 years old. And it's like, okay, yeah, he's a perfect fit as a player, but the circumstances around him I don't get. And I also want to add, I know there's talk of, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, maybe the Clippers do something. My honest guess, maybe this is wrong, but we'll see. I think the Clippers extend both of those players
I think
that they have their players.
That's the likeliest scenario.
They decline their player options and extend for a max. Because, John, do you know what happens at the start of the 2024-25 season in LA? Do you know what's significant about that year?
Yeah, they open an arena that has a lot of toilets, apparently.
Toilets everywhere, right? And they want to keep toilets. Right. They want to keep the shit in the toilets and not on the court. And how do you market that arena? You have your stars getting paid. You're still in it. You still owe draft picks to the Thunder. I just don't see them as options.
If they were going to blow it up, I think we would have gotten wind of that already. So we could move on from that.
Right. And then the last thing, okay, you trade RJ for a wing defender. Well, let's just explore option C. So I looked at EPM, our good old friend EPM. And I basically said, okay, find me players who had at least a 0. That's a good 0 is fine on the offensive EPM angle. And at least a 1, which is really good on the defensive EPM. Make sure that they're at least 6'4", because we're looking at wings here. And also, we don't want centers. We want to rule out the centers. We're really just looking for the wing types. And you come up with 3 names that have overlap over the last 3 years. All right. And I'm talking again about if you're under 30 in 2023, good. If you're under 29 in 2022, good. If you're under 28 in 2021, good. 3 players repeat at least once. First is Lonzo Ball. Lonzo was great on both sides in 2021 and in 2022. Problem is injuries. He didn't play last year. He may never play again. He's not an option. And then there are 2 other names that appeared on this list 3 times. One, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Obvious, right? It's very obvious that he's there. The other is OG Anunoby. Now, if you think Jeremy's just going to go on like he has before and say OG Anunoby is the Knicks target, I'm here to tell you I'm not. I'm actually not going to advise the Knicks in this case of getting OG Anunoby, and I don't think they're going to go after him. There are a few reasons why. Number one, if you're replacing RJ with someone like OG Anunoby, you're now saying, cool, we have 2 Royce O'Neal archetypes, right? It's not Royce O'Neal, but you have 2 players who do exactly that. And you've completely taken a pull-up shooter out of the equation, a driver out of the equation. There's no real high offense. You need to, almost like Moneyball, you need to use the aggregate to replace RJ. And I don't think that's viable. I think there was a time and a place for OG, and it was before, and the price was too high. And then the Knicks went with someone who happens to be on the list of players under 30 this past season who fit the criteria, and that is Josh Hart. And I think that the OG Anunoby itch was scratched because they got Josh Hart. And they're comfortable rolling him out there to, hey, look, say, you're not as good as OG Anunoby, but you also don't cost nearly as much as what that is. And you roll with it. So I think that you rule that whole thing out. So then let's look at some other alternative options, right? So let's look again at these players who are under the age of 30 this past season. Let's take out all the players who finished with under 25 minutes per game, right? Because if you're a star, you're seeing a lot more time than that. Let's look at the players who have an offensive EPM greater than or equal to 1. Those are star numbers, right? There are going to be some players in there who maybe aren't stars, but meet the criteria, but it should be consistent. What we're going to do, we're going to screen out point guards. Knicks are all set on point guards. The only player that would really be screened out in this would be Luka Doncic. Not happening this offseason. So we can just put that away. I'm also screening out power forwards. Why? Well, again, we're talking about Julius being here consistently. So we're screening out Giannis. Screen out Zion, especially because how do you say, hey, we need more spacing? Although Zion's very efficient because he's an elite player, but then also go with someone who keeps missing games at such an incredible angle that how do you do it? Jaren Jackson Jr., I don't see him moving. Just won the Defensive Player of the Year award. Year 1 of a 4-year contract in the books. It's descending. Don't see why the Grizzlies would move him right now. Aaron Gordon on the Denver Nuggets, who are currently in the in the finals, waiting for their opponent. Pascal Siakam. I understand the love that a lot of Knicks fans have. The numbers would say he has not been as lethal as that 2019 Raptors championship run. And he's he's been very good. Don't get me wrong. Like we saw him put up 54 in the Garden, and that was just one game. But like
Pascal's good.
He's a very good player. It's just okay. Well, you're looking at someone who really good defensively. Again, doesn't grade out at the elite level like I think his reputation has. Doesn't shoot as many threes as the Knicks would want. Is that something that he has in his bag? I think he goes elsewhere and isn't an option here. And then Karl Anthony Towns is the last four that I would say we screen out. I actually don't feel he's moving this year. I think that next offseason, his new contract poses a new issue, and I'm sure we'll have that conversation then. But the Wolves can get their affairs in order and keep Cat, especially since he missed so much time last time. And I don't think he's obviously a step up over Julius, especially from the efficiency and the shooting aspect of it, but not enough where the picks that it would take to acquire him and the money that he costs, upwards of $50 million like every year, is worth it. Any pushback on any of those things I've just mentioned so far?
I mean, look, if they get in the Cat business, I don't think it's Julius going out. I think it's RJ, and I think it's Mitch having to go to a third team. And I agree it's going to cost more by way of picks, and it's a road I hope they don't go down.
Will the Knicks, who have been so key in terms of rim protection at the 5,
that's why
sacrifice that to the point and not replace Julia? It's a lot of moving parts is all I'm saying. Which is why I'm skeptical it happens this year.
The notion that you're going to win a championship pairing Karl Anthony Towns and Julius Randle as your 4-5 on defense is, it's the thing that I don't get every time I come back to the Cat idea. I'm not a Cat guy, but it's brought up so much and it's rumored so much. You kind of have to give it its due course in terms of considering it. I just there's no way that they think that could work defensively. No, and they're not sending, even if Minnesota wants them, they're not sending Julius Randle to Minnesota. So
right. And last thing on Cat, Tibbs saw you're not a 5, so I'm getting Taj Gibson in here. Tibbs left. Connolly came in, said you're not a 5. I'm bringing Gobert in, or at least management said that. He's a 4. Like that's just how that's where he's at. And then the defensive lapses that he has. Right, exactly. And so it's a lot to give up for a player who's a tweener, so to speak, from that angle. But
yeah, tweener not in a good way.
And the last thing we'll screen out to the centers, the two notable, Joel Embiid, not going anywhere this offseason, certainly. Nikola Jokic, definitely not going anywhere anytime soon. So essentially what we've done is we've talked about, okay, you're moving RJ for wings because you're probably not moving Randle because, yes, you could move RJ for a 4 and Randle for a wing. You could absolutely do that. But you need the right ones to then come about, and both need to be available. It needs to be worth the cost of everything. And we've talked about why Julius probably isn't moving this year, but could be in the future. So, John, this list narrows down to 20 players. And I want you to start with the first name.
Okay.
It's the bottom name, and we will alternate, and then we'll parse it out from there.
Okay. Anthony Edwards is not getting traded.
Yeah. Franz Wagner not getting moved.
Mikal Bridges, I guess, might get moved. He ain't get moved to the Knicks, though.
Anthony Simons could get moved. Not someone that I think is an upgrade based, even with everything we've just talked about with RJ.
Again, you want to talk about the Knicks needed defensive strength in their guards, wings, alongside Jalen Brunson. Simons ain't helping you there.
Although, just very quickly, the one thing with Simons, the offense is very good, and the Knicks have said we can live with 2 okay offensive players as long as we can live with their defense being meh if their offense is really good. But Simons just isn't appealing to me, right? So
he ain't at that level. Who I'm up? You're up next.
Yeah, Jaylen Brown. He's fighting. He and his team are fighting for their lives right now, so to speak. Very soon, we'll see what that outcome is. But does he want to go? I don't know.
Supermax. I mean, I just don't. And if they, no, I'm not. Well, maybe we end up having that conversation. I'm not ready to yet. Derek White, hero of Game 6, not the type of guy that we're looking for here.
Right, Tyler Hero, same thing. Not it.
Buddy Hield, try again. No.
Yep. Cameron Johnson, really good player, restricted free agent. He's not coming to the Knicks. The Nets will match, or they'll sign and trade somewhere else if they had to. I would just assume he comes back.
Brandon Ingram, who's a guy that I'm a big fan of, and I love Brandon Ingram. I don't know if there's what should I say about Brandon Ingram? He's really good. You want. Yeah, I think Brandon Ingram's really good. I think he's a guy that's been kind of like, because like the RJ Zion thing is that maybe the basis of a trade. I would be surprised if New Orleans entertained a Brandon Ingram trade this summer.
Yeah, Kevin Huerter, Red Velvet, not a star, not the one that you'd move with RJ Barrett in mind.
Maxey, no. That's not the guy.
Yep. Zach LaVine, no idea what's going on in Chicago. It's a weird situation. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's been a name that's been bandied about. We may have to revisit him at some point. But like you said, we have no idea what's going on in Chicago. Michael Porter Jr. is probably going to be a member of the NBA champions pretty soon. And also not the guy that the Knicks are looking for the spot. And the Denver's not trading him.
Same with Desmond Bane in terms, not the championship part, but
he's not going anywhere
part.
Lauri Markkanen is not going anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think he's untouchable, but I think it costs so much that you're paying for a number two as the price of a number one. SGA not going anywhere. Just don't see it happening.
Donovan Mitchell may go somewhere at some point. I don't think it's going to be this summer.
No, I would agree with that. Jason Tatum, I wouldn't count on it. The only reason is if Jaylen Brown decides, for whatever reason, doesn't want to be in Boston anymore, that could open the door for Tatum the next year. But this year, I would be shocked.
Yeah, he'd make my top 5 list of players that I'm willing to bet on being on their team again next year, as would probably this guy, Devin Booker.
Yep.
Last name on the list.
So we just talked about 20 players. Let's talk about Jaylen Brown very quickly. And I'm just going to ask these questions. Why are the Celtics trading Brown? Why is Brown not signing a Supermax contract thanks to his All-NBA status? Why are the Celtics trading Brown to the Knicks? What are the Knicks giving up for Brown? Can Brown be the best player on a contender? Does Brown, an unrestricted free agent in 2024, want to stay with the Knicks? These questions are largely rhetorical, but the one thing I'll say, Jaylen Brown's a phenomenal player. The cost of acquisition, again, is going to feel like paying for a number one, but he's really more of a number two. And Jaylen Brown is, like, again, if he doesn't want the money to stay in Boston on a team that could very easily, as you're hearing this, have made the NBA Finals for the second year in a row, or made the Eastern Conference Finals at the very least for however many years in a row, why is he leaving that team? And what does he want if he decides the money isn't worth it? I just don't think it's New York.
I just, for a whole host of reasons, which you kind of touched on just now, I don't see Jaylen Brown getting traded this summer.
Right. So let's now talk about Brandon Ingram. And we're going to ask similar questions. Why are the Pelicans trading Ingram, specifically this offseason? Why are they trading him to the Knicks? What are the Knicks giving up for Ingram? Can Ingram be the best player on a contender? Does Ingram, an unrestricted free agent in 2025, want to stay with the Knicks? And I think the conversation that we're having is very applicable to that of Jaylen Brown. The one thing I'd go even further with is, yes, both these players, really good pull-up shooters, very good in the half court, do things in transition. They're largely efficient. Brandon Ingram has missed a lot of time. I mean, he's just been injured frequently. And it's not to say I wouldn't touch Brandon Ingram with a 10-foot pole. I would welcome him on the team, price depending, of course. But it's just difficult when he's missed so many games over the last, 3-4 years? I mean, I'll let you vamp while I quickly look it up, but it's a lot.
No, he's missed time. Brandon Ingram is obviously really good. He's like, I don't know, if Jaylen Brown's the 15th best player in the league, is Brandon Ingram the 20th? Is he the 22nd? Is he the 25th? He's still kind of young, still a little bit of bloom on the rose. When he looks good, my God, does he look good? And then there are times where he kind of goes in and out. You nailed it with the cost, because it's not RJ for Brandon Ingram straight up. I tell you that much. Mm-hmm. It goes back to, if you're New Orleans, okay, so you're making yourself worse and you're going to make, and you're okay. And the Knicks are going to pay you picks to do that. Why? You have picks. Like you want to get good. You want to get better. You want to compete in the West now. Like you don't want to trade down from Brandon Ingram. You want to get more talent around Brandon Ingram. I don't see it.
Yeah. So Ingram has missed, he missed 37 games this past year, and he missed 27 the year before that. 11 the year before that, 10 the year before that, which is fine. 30 the year before that. Yes, they are. And I think
a 2-for-1, it's not, I don't see that either.
Right. So if you're telling me also, if you're the Pelicans, I'm again, completely off the dome, right? If there's a player the Pelicans move, I don't think it's Brandon Ingram. I think it's more likely to be a Zion Williamson type. Like, think about it. If you're
I don't.
If you're a
think
Portland
it's nuts.
or a Houston type team, and you're thinking of impact players, like maybe you call them. But again, I'm just spitballing here. I don't want to deviate too far. But it's the point of Ingram leaving these teams unless he says to the Pelicans, "Hey, I'm not re-signing here." Then you have a different conversation. But I just don't see it that way.